The first time my husband called me financially helpless, he said it with a smile. That's what made it worse. Not anger, not cruelty shouted loudly across a room, just calm humiliation wrapped inside fake concern. "You'd be lost without me," Vincent laughed softly while signing restaurant receipts one evening. "You don't even know how investment accounts work." Our friends chuckled awkwardly around the dinner table. And I smiled too. Because after 8 years of marriage, I had become very good at pretending things didn't hurt. But they did. God, they did. Especially because Vincent wasn't just joking anymore. Over time, his comments became part of our relationship structure. Small reminders designed to keep me beneath him financially. He paid bills publicly, handled every major purchase personally, corrected me during conversations about money even when I hadn't spoken, and eventually, he started making decisions without consulting me entirely. At first, I convinced myself it came from stress. Vincent built a successful private investment firm from almost nothing, and success changed him slowly over the years. The more money he made, the more he began treating wealth like intelligence itself, as if financial success automatically made him wiser than everyone around him, especially me. The irony? Vincent had absolutely no idea who he married. That part still makes me laugh sometimes. Because while my husband proudly explained compound interest to me like I was a child, I quietly owned assets worth over $40 million, hidden carefully behind private trusts, inherited properties, and old family investments Vincent never once suspected existed. Not because I was deceiving him maliciously, because I wanted one thing desperately before marriage: to know someone loved me without money involved. My grandfather warned me not to hide wealth completely. People reveal themselves around power eventually, he told me years ago. And money is power. I didn't fully understand that back then. I do now. The truth is, when Vincent met me, I looked ordinary intentionally. Simple apartment, normal car, freelance design work, nothing flashy. And for a while, it was wonderful. He loved me easily back then, before success inflated his ego large enough to need superiority constantly. The shift happened gradually after his company took off. Suddenly, every argument somehow became tied to finances. "You don't understand pressure because you've never carried us financially. I built this life for us. You should appreciate how hard I work." Us. Interesting word considering everything legally belonged to him alone by choice. Or so he believed. I remember one specific night 6 months ago that changed something inside me permanently. We attended a charity gala hosted by wealthy investors downtown. During dinner, another guest asked whether I worked in finance too. Before I could answer, Vincent laughed loudly. "Oh, Claire avoids numbers completely," he joked. "If I disappeared tomorrow, she'd probably forget how to pay electricity." The entire table laughed politely, including me. But underneath that laughter, humiliation burned so deeply it almost became anger, because Vincent genuinely believed it. He truly thought I depended on him for survival. And eventually, that belief was about to destroy him completely. 3 weeks after the charity gala, Vincent bought himself a new car. Not because he needed one, because he wanted people to see it. A silver Aston Martin delivered directly to our house while neighbors watched from their windows admiringly. Vincent loved moments like that. Public success, visible wealth, performance. He spent nearly an hour walking around the car explaining engine specifications to me like I cared emotionally about horsepower. "Beautiful, right?" he asked proudly. "It's nice," I answered. Vincent laughed softly. "Nice?" He shook his head. "Claire, this car costs more than most people make in 5 years." There it was again, that subtle superiority woven into normal conversation constantly now. Not enough to start fights. Just enough to remind me who supposedly held power financially. I watched him carefully while sunlight reflected across the polished car surface. 8 years earlier, Vincent would have been embarrassed to talk like this openly. Now arrogance fit him comfortably. Success changes people. But money doesn't create character. It reveals it. That same evening, Vincent hosted several investors at our house for dinner. Men exactly like him. Wealthy, competitive, obsessed with status disguised as business culture. I sat quietly through most of the conversation while they discussed acquisitions and portfolio growth aggressively over expensive whiskey. Then one investor turned toward me, smiling politely. "So, Claire," he asked casually, "what do you invest in?" Before I could answer, Vincent spoke immediately. She invests emotionally, he joked. I handle the actual financial decisions. Laughter again, always laughter. Something inside me tightened painfully. The investor looked uncomfortable this time, though. I'm sure Claire has interests of her own. Vincent waved dismissively. She's happier staying out of complex financial stuff. Complex financial stuff. Interesting phrase considering my grandfather's trust alone controlled commercial real estate across 3 states. I looked at Vincent silently for several seconds, and for the first time in years, I felt tired instead of hurt. Tired of shrinking myself so his ego could stay comfortable. Tired of pretending ignorance because male pride required it. Tired of sitting silently while someone explained wealth to me using money partially built from connections my family quietly opened for him years earlier. Because that was another secret Vincent never knew. Several of his earliest investors came through my grandfather's private network. Not because I manipulated his career, because I loved him enough to help discreetly without damaging his confidence. Funny how generosity becomes invisible once people believe they succeeded alone. Later that night, after the guests left, Vincent poured himself another drink while scrolling through stock reports on his tablet. You were quiet tonight, he noted casually. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching him carefully. You embarrassed me again. Vincent barely looked up. Oh, come on, Claire. Nobody took it seriously. That's the problem. Now he looked at me. What's that supposed to mean? I crossed my arms slowly. You constantly talk about me like I'm financially incompetent. Vincent sighed heavily immediately, like the conversation itself exhausted him already. You're being sensitive. Classic. The universal response of people who hurt others casually. I built everything we have, he continued calmly. I just think you should appreciate that more. Everything we have. I almost smiled. Because technically, the house we lived in sat on land owned through one of my private holding companies. Vincent didn't know that either. He continued talking while checking emails again. You've had a comfortable life because of me, Claire. And suddenly, something inside me finally broke. Not loudly, quietly, completely. Because for the first time, I realized my husband didn't just underestimate me financially. He genuinely believed my value came from his success. And very soon, reality was going to humiliate him harder than I ever could. The beginning of Vincent's collapse started with one bad investment. Funny how men who think they control everything usually fall through overconfidence first. 6 weeks after the dinner party, Vincent became obsessed with a tech acquisition involving an overseas artificial intelligence startup. Every conversation at home suddenly revolved around expansion forecasts, investor excitement, and projected profits. He talked about the deal constantly, too constantly. That should have been my first warning. People who truly understand money usually speak carefully around risk. But Vincent had reached the dangerous stage of success where confidence starts disguising itself as intelligence. One evening, he walked into the kitchen practically glowing with excitement. This changes everything, he announced. I looked up from my laptop calmly. What does? The Nexora acquisition. He grinned proudly. If this closes, we triple firm valuation within 18 months. I nodded slowly. Sounds risky. Vincent laughed immediately. There you go again. My jaw tightened slightly. What's that supposed to mean? You always get nervous around big financial decisions. Interesting, because deep down, I already knew his numbers didn't make sense. Nexora's valuation projections were inflated aggressively. Their debt exposure looked unstable. Even worse, several shell partnerships connected to the company raised serious legal concerns. Any experienced wealth manager could see it, including me. But Vincent never once asked my opinion seriously. So instead, I stayed quiet. Partly because I was tired. Partly because I needed to know whether my husband respected me enough to hear warnings from someone he viewed as beneath him financially. Turns out, he didn't. Over the next month, Vincent invested nearly everything liquid his firm controlled into the acquisition. He leveraged property lines, expanded credit exposure, convinced investors to double commitments aggressively. And the entire time, he kept treating me like decorative background noise inside our own marriage. Then came Friday night, the night everything exploded. Vincent burst through the front door around midnight looking pale enough to scare me instantly. His tie hung loose around his neck while panic radiated visibly from his entire body. Vincent? He ignored me initially, rushing straight toward his office while dialing his phone repeatedly. No, listen to me. He snapped into the call. Freeze withdrawals immediately. My stomach tightened. I followed him quietly. What happened? Vincent ended the call abruptly before looking at me. And for the first time in our marriage, I saw genuine fear. Nexora collapsed. The room went silent. He ran both hands through his hair aggressively now. Federal investigation, fraud allegations, accounts frozen. His breathing sounded uneven. Investors are panicking. I stared at him carefully while realization spread slowly through me. This was catastrophic, not embarrassing. Catastrophic. How bad? I asked quietly. Vincent laughed once under his breath. Not humor, shock. We could lose everything. Everything. Interesting word. Because suddenly the man who constantly reminded me how helpless I'd be without him looked completely lost himself. He sat heavily inside his office chair, staring blankly at financial reports flooding across his computer screens. Then came the sentence I never expected to hear from Vincent. We might have to sell the house. I looked around slowly at the property he believed belonged entirely to him, then back at my husband. And deep down, I realized something important. For the first time ever, Vincent was about to experience what powerlessness actually felt like. The next 2 weeks destroyed Vincent completely, not physically, psychologically. I watched it happen slowly in real time. The confident man who once lectured everyone about financial discipline suddenly stopped sleeping. He paced through the house at night, whispering into phones with lawyers and investors while pretending everything remained manageable. But panic has a smell, and eventually it filled every room. The Nexora scandal exploded publicly faster than anyone expected. Federal investigations froze multiple connected accounts while investors began threatening lawsuits aggressively. Financial news channels ran stories non-stop. Vincent's company name appeared beside words like reckless exposure, mismanagement, and liability concerns. The humiliation alone nearly killed him, because men like Vincent survive on perception, and now perception was collapsing publicly. One morning, I found him sitting alone at the kitchen table staring blankly at unpaid reports, dark circles under his eyes, hands shaking slightly. He looked older suddenly, smaller too. We need to discuss options, he said quietly without looking up. Options. Interesting word for desperation. I sat across from him calmly. What kind of options? Vincent swallowed hard before finally meeting my eyes. We may need to liquidate personal assets. Personal assets. Again, funny wording considering most of those assets legally traced back to structures connected to my family trusts. But he still didn't know that. He slid several papers across the table toward me. Refinancing proposals, property restructuring plans, emergency credit agreements, and near the bottom, signature lines waiting for mine. My chest tightened slightly. Not because of the documents themselves. Because suddenly I remembered the countless times Vincent signed things confidently while treating me like someone incapable of understanding financial systems. Now, here he sat, needing my cooperation to survive. How much trouble are you actually in? I asked quietly. Vincent rubbed his face tiredly. Worse than I thought. That was probably the most honest sentence he'd spoken in years. I looked through the paperwork slowly while silence stretched between us. Then I noticed something dangerous. Very dangerous. One clause transferred shared property rights into external collateral protections connected directly to Vincent's remaining business debt. If I signed these documents carelessly, everything attached to my private holdings risked exposure too. I set the papers down carefully. I'm not signing this. His head snapped upward immediately. What? The collateral clauses are reckless. Silence. Then Vincent frowned slightly like he genuinely couldn't believe I recognized the issue. That's standard restructuring language. No, I answered calmly. It's predatory protection designed to absorb personal property during default exposure. For several seconds, Vincent just stared at me. Actually stared. Like he was hearing someone else's voice coming from my mouth unexpectedly. You understand this contract? The question almost insulted me more than the contract itself. I held his gaze steadily. Yes. Vincent leaned back slowly now, confusion replacing frustration briefly. How? Before I could answer, his phone rang sharply across the table. He answered immediately, and whatever the caller said next destroyed the remaining color in his face completely. No, he whispered. Silence. Then softer. They're pulling out entirely? My stomach tightened. Another investor gone. Vincent ended the call slowly before staring down at the table blankly. Then finally, for the first time ever, my husband looked directly at me without arrogance, without superiority, without control, just fear, real fear. And deep down, I knew the moment had finally arrived. The moment Vincent would learn exactly who he married. Vincent sat motionless for several long seconds after the call ended. The silence between us felt completely unfamiliar now. For years, he filled every room with certainty. Even during arguments, Vincent always spoke like a man convinced control naturally belonged to him. But that version of him was gone. And sitting across from me now was someone terrified. They pulled the final liquidity support, he said quietly. I nodded once, not surprised. Companies built on aggressive leverage collapse fast once confidence disappears. Vincent stared down at the untouched paperwork scattered across the kitchen table, then finally asked something I never expected to hear. What do we do? We. Interesting, because suddenly financial decisions weren't his territory alone anymore. I looked at him carefully, really carefully. And for the first time in years, I saw my husband without ego protecting him. Just a man realizing money can disappear faster than identity rebuilds. You should have listened when I warned you about Nixora, I said calmly. Vincent closed his eyes briefly. I know. No argument, no correction. That alone felt shocking. He rubbed both hands over his face slowly before speaking again. I thought you didn't understand this world. There it was. The truth beneath everything, not cruelty, assumption, arrogant, destructive assumption. I stood quietly and walked toward the large windows overlooking our backyard while morning rain tapped softly against the glass. You never asked whether I understood, I said softly. You decided I didn't. Behind me, Vincent stayed silent. Because he knew I was right, I turned slowly toward him. Do you know why I never fought harder when you mocked me financially? He frowned slightly. Claire. Because I kept hoping eventually you'd love me enough to stop needing superiority. The pain on his face deepened instantly. But again, too late. I walked back toward the table calmly. Then I did something that changed everything permanently. I opened my laptop, logged into one of my private holding accounts, and rotated the screen toward him. At first, Vincent barely looked. Then his eyes focused, and all breathing seemed to stop inside the room. The account balance alone exceeded $42 million. But it wasn't just the number. It was the account structure. Private trusts, commercial real estate portfolios, international investment holdings, generational wealth management systems, Vincent immediately recognized as old money architecture. His face went completely pale. What? His voice cracked slightly. What is this? My financial portfolio. Silence. Absolute silence. Vincent stared at the screen like reality itself had malfunctioned. You're joking. I'm not. His eyes moved frantically across the documents, now searching for explanation, fraud, misunderstanding, anything except truth. But the truth sat directly in front of him, impossible to deny. You have $42 million? More, technically. That sentence shattered whatever remained of his composure. He stood abruptly from the chair. Why would you hide this from me? Interesting. Not how, not when, why. Because deep down, Vincent already understood the answer. I looked directly at him. Because I needed to know someone loved me without money involved. The silence afterward felt devastating. Vincent looked physically sick now, not from greed, humiliation, because suddenly every joke, every condescending comment, every lecture about financial dependence replayed inside his head from an entirely different perspective. The woman he treated like a helpless burden was secretly wealthier than him the entire marriage. And worst of all, She helped build parts of his success quietly without ever demanding recognition. Vincent lowered himself slowly back into the chair. You knew, he whispered. Yes. You let me believe. Yes. His eyes filled with something I hadn't seen from him in years. Shame. Real shame. And somehow, that hurt more than arrogance ever did. Vincent didn't speak for a long time after that. He just sat there, staring at the table like it had become something unfamiliar. Like the world he thought he understood had quietly shifted without permission. Finally, he whispered, So everything I said about you, I finished the sentence for him, was wrong. Silence. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping against the glass in steady rhythm. Vincent rubbed his hands together slowly, as if trying to ground himself in something physical. I thought I was helping you, he said quietly. I looked at him directly. That's not what you were doing. He nodded once. Because now he knew. There was no room left for denial, only recognition. For the first time in our entire marriage, Vincent's voice wasn't controlled. It was uncertain. What happens now? He asked. A simple question, but loaded. Because now nothing between us could go back to what it was. I walked slowly toward the window again, watching the rain blur the world outside. Your company is collapsing, I said calmly. You're going to lose investors, possibly assets, maybe even legal battles. Vincent closed his eyes, not surprised anymore, just exhausted. Then I turned back toward him. But you're not the only one who has decisions to make. He looked up at me. And for the first time, there was no assumption in his eyes, only listening. I continued. You spent years speaking to me like I was financially dependent on you. Vincent flinched slightly. And I allowed it, I added. Because I wanted to see how far you'd go when you believed I had nothing. His expression tightened. Claire? I raised my hand slightly. No, let me finish. Silence again. I didn't hide my wealth to deceive you, I said quietly. I hid it to understand whether your love had conditions. That sentence landed heavier than anything before it. Vincent swallowed hard. I didn't love you because of money, he said quickly. I nodded slowly. I believe you. That surprised him. But I wasn't finished. But you stopped respecting me the moment you thought I had less power than you. Silence. No argument followed, because there wasn't one. Only truth sitting between us now. Vincent looked down at his hands. I destroyed this, he whispered. I didn't deny it, because denial would have been mercy, and mercy wasn't what this moment needed. After a long pause, I finally spoke again. What happens next depends on you. He looked up immediately, hope and fear mixed together in his expression now. I continued calmly. You can rebuild honestly this time, without superiority, without control, without assuming anyone beneath you. Vincent nodded slowly. Or, you can walk away and try to salvage what's left of your ego somewhere else. Silence. Then he asked softly, And us? That question hung in the air longer than anything else. I looked at him for a long time. Not with anger anymore. Not with love either. Just clarity. I don't know, I answered honestly. Because that was the truth. Some betrayals don't end relationships. They redefine them permanently. Vincent stood slowly, walking toward the window beside me. For once, he didn't try to stand above me. He just stood beside me. Quiet, broken, human. I wish I had known earlier, he said. I nodded slightly. So do I. Outside, the rain finally began to slow. Not because anything was fixed, but because storms don't last forever, even the ones we create ourselves. And in that silence between us, there was no victory, no revenge, no humiliation left to give, only the uncomfortable beginning of truth.